Hey, today we're going to be learning about mean, median, mode, and range. This is going to be a great time to take some notes. Feel free to pause the video at any time to get anything written down that you might need. And this is a great video to keep referring back to throughout this week of learning this concept. The first one we're going to talk about is mean, or the average. I like to call this Mr. Mean. And the reason I call this Mr. Mean is because this is probably the one that requires the most math. So whenever we talk about finding the mean, I draw Mr. Mean. First thing you have to do is add all of your data together. So we're going to make some plus sign eyeballs. And then after you add all of your data together, you need to divide by the amount of data you had. So in this case, when I added all of the numbers together, I got an answer of 42. Then I'm going to count how many numbers I added. I added 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers. So the number amount I'm going to divide by is 7. So the first number, 42, came from when I added them together, and then 7 came from how many numbers I added together. And after I divide, I get my answer. So in order to make this look more like a person, because Mr. Mean needs some hair, maybe he needs a little chin in there, maybe some ears. If you can remember Mr. Mean, then you should be able to remember the process of finding mean. The next one that we're going to look at is median. When it comes to median, I like to think of a road. When you have a road, you have traffic that is going one direction, and you have traffic going the other direction on most roads. The thing in the middle is called a median. The median is always found in the middle. However, this is one that if you don't put your numbers in order to begin with, you're not going to find the middle correctly. So the very first step you must do is the numbers must be in order from smallest to largest. Once you find the numbers in smallest to largest, then you just start crossing off from left to right until you get to the middle. Now, there are some cases where you have 2 numbers in the middle because you had an even amount of data pieces. Let's take a look at an example if our middle 2 numbers turned out to be 5 and 8. The best way to find it is you can write all the numbers between 5 and 8 then. 5, 6, 7, 8. Now notice there's still only 4 numbers, so we can cross out the 5 and 8, and I'm left with 6 and 7. Well, what comes between 6 and 7? The number that comes between both of those is 6.5. You can write that either as 6.5 as we've learned, or you can write it as 6 and a fraction of 1/2. The more common way, though, is going to be 6.5. Sorry for the small screen there. Our next one is mode. Just like the first letters in mode, this one is the most. Now, when it means most, it doesn't mean that it's the one that's the highest value. It means the one that appears the most. So it's the one that shows up the most amount. So in this case, we have a 3, a 3, a 3, a 6, a 7, a 7, and a 13. 3 shows up 3 times. 6 shows up 1 time. 7 shows up 2 times. And 13 shows up 1 time. So the one that shows up the most often is going to be our 3s. This is one of the cases where you might actually have more than one mode. If you have values that show up more often than others and they show up the same amount, both of them could be your mode. If all of the data pieces show up only one time, then you don't have a mode. Our very last definition is range. Range is when we find the difference. When we talk about difference, we are talking about subtraction from the biggest number to the smallest number. So if we put our numbers in order from smallest to greatest, we can find our biggest number, which is 13. So that's our biggest number. And we can subtract it by our smallest number, which is 3. 13 minus 3 gives us 10. So we have a range from our smallest value to our biggest value of 10 different numbers that could have happened. And that's what that means. Throughout this week, you're going to be trying to practice some different worksheets. Please pay attention to your schedule plan. Some of the worksheets have challenge problems on them that are not needed to be completed, but give them a whirl if you got a chance to try them out. I'll make a different video on how to solve those if you do want to give them a shot. We're now going to go through a few examples. Now, whenever we're trying to find the mean, the median, mode, and the range, this is a great time to first start with a step that's going to help you with pretty much all of these. And that is to order your numbers from smallest to greatest first. So our first number is 3. As I do this, I like to cross out the numbers as I use them so that I can put them in order and not repeat myself on any of the numbers. So I have a 3, a 3, a 3, and I crossed all those out. I have a 6, a 7, and another 7, and a 13. So sometimes it's easier to start with the ones that are a little bit easier. Like mode, remember mode means most often. And so we're trying to find the ones that appear the most often. On here you see that I have a 3, a 3, a 3. So I have 3 of those. I have 1 6. I have 2 7s. And I have 1 13. So what appears the most often is 3. Now, what you probably have noticed is this is actually the example that was used in our first demonstration. So I'm going to move on to the next one just to give you another glimpse. First step, put them in order. See, Mrs. Barrett should be writing them down and crossing them out as she goes. She's got a 2, she's got a 3, she's got a 4, a 4, a 4, a 5, and a 6. So I'm going to go with my mode. Remember, mode means most often. I have 1 2, I have 1 3, I have 3 4s, 1 5, and 1 6. So the number that shows up the most often is 4. Let's go to mean. Remember, the first part of mean is to add our numbers, and then we're gonna divide. As I've taught you guys this year, it's best to add only a few numbers at a time. If you try to add this whole string of numbers at once, you're going to probably make some kind of calculation error. So this is a good time to use a scrap piece of paper or any extra given space, like here in the little column, that I can add my numbers. In order to make sure I add the right amount, put some kind of marking by them. So I'm going to put a dot as I use them. That way I make sure that I have used them all. I know that some of you like to combine some of your numbers and not do one at a time. Just make sure that you really are marking the ones as you go. So again, if I wanted to add my 2 4s, knowing that's 8, I could put an 8 in here, but I marked both of them, so I made sure I used them both. I've got a 5. And our last number that we need to use is our 6. So we came up with a number of 28. That's our first step in this one. Notice that one took a lot more work to come up with. That's why, again, I like to use the Mr. Mean, because it helps remind me that this one's going to take some more work. So the first step was to add them all. The next step is to divide. Remember, we're dividing by how many numbers I added. So I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 7 numbers in our data piece. So I'm going to get 28 divided by 7, which is 4. Now, because I have some work shown in that box, I'm going to circle my answer so it can be found quicker. My next one's going to be my median. Median is when you find the middle. So I can cross out as I go 2 and 6, 3 and 5, 4 and 4, and I was left with a 4 in the middle. Since I had an odd number of data, I did get a middle number. If you have an even number of data, then you got to keep going till you can find a middle. Sometimes it's going to be an easy amount. Sometimes it's going to take you a little bit more work, like I showed on the first screen. Range is our big number, which in this case, our biggest number is 6, minus our smallest number. So big minus small, and our smallest number is 2. 6 minus 2 is 4. Now, not always is the case going to be that every single box came up with the same answer. But if you're finding the middle of your data, you're finding the mean of your data, a lot of times those ones are going to be closer together unless you have what's called an outlier. An outlier is a piece of data that's really far away from the rest of the data in numbers. But that's a lesson more for another grade. What I'd like you to do right now is pause the video and try the next problem on your own. All right, welcome back. The very first step I hope you did when you were finding these was to put them in order. If you put them in order and making sure you did it one at a time, you probably didn't miss any of your data pieces. That again is a very crucial first step in coming up with mean, median, mode, and range. After you did that, then you could have solved any of the given ones. We're going to work backwards this time. We're going to do the range. Because I put my numbers in order, I can see my biggest number is 12, and I can subtract it from my smallest number, 5. 12 minus 5 is 7. So 7 is my answer for the range. For the mode, it's the one that shows up the most often. And the one that shows up the most often is 8. 8 shows up 2 times. All the rest of them only showed up once. We can go to the median. The median is the middle. We got a 5 and a 12, a 6 and a 10, a 7 and an 8, and we are left with an 8 in the middle. That very last one, we need to add our numbers. Again, if you would like to combine things ahead of time, you are welcome to, but just make sure that you are adding everything together. So the best solution is to add one at a time. We have a 5 plus a 6. And since this is my last data piece, I can fully cross them out now. I used both of those to get my 11. Plus, we have a 7. Plus, we have our 8. We're up to 26. Then we add another 8. To get us to our 34. After that 8, we're adding a 10. I hope you're checking your math as you go. And the last one we're adding is our 12. So we ended up getting 56 when we added all of the numbers together. Then we need to divide. And remember, we're dividing by how many numbers I had. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers. So 56 divided by 7 is 8. Again, if you notice, a lot of our values are similar amounts. I hope this video has helped you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to get a hold of me through Schoology email, or we can Zoom.